All right, you guys. Welcome to class. Let me see something really quickly. Hold on one second. There we go. I think that's probably going to be a little bit better. And then this one as well. Let's do that. All right. So I'm back at my desk, but I'm just don't have everything quite set up yet. It's difficult for me to set things up, but um, this class in particular will be a little bit easier for me to work at my regular workstation. I might need to adjust at some point to bring my leg up, so if I do, I'll just hit mute and let you guys know. But today's class is actually going to be we're kind of getting down to the wire. I think we have 6 weeks left. Let me see. One this week, next week. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks left. All right, we have 7 weeks of class left, and we're kind of we're getting to a point where we need to more focus on in class the projects that we're going to be doing, and less of going over your work that you guys turn in class, because that takes up a lot of time, especially because there's quite a few of you guys in class. And so because of that, I am going to start giving you guys feedback, usually on my days off, probably the weekends, on the projects that you turn in inside of Canvas, and not during class. And so that way you guys will have all, like, each class will be dedicated specifically to what we're learning, and less of the feedback, obviously. But you'll still be getting it to make changes to things. And so I'm a little bit behind. I still have to give you guys some feedback on your revision rounds, and then I'll also have to give you feedback on the robot arms, which were due yesterday. And so I'll probably get to those during this weekend at some point. And then, yeah, we'll just continue working, submitting things into Slack for like student peer review. And that way we can just kind of, these projects are going to get a little heavier and heavier, and so we're going to really need to dedicate the time. With that being said, you still will have your participation grades. Okay, so there's still, on Thursdays, I'm still going to go through your participation questions. You guys have one due tomorrow night by 11, so I believe that is what I have it on here. Yep, Wednesday 11 or 12 a.m. essentially, 11:59 p.m. So get it turned in by then, and we can go over any of your questions and stuff for last week's project or for today's project, which is going to be modeling and rigging the EveBot. And because we kind of miss a whole week of class with spring break here, so it's important that we kind of catch up at this moment. But this Eve, we did the modeling, or we did the rigging and creating in like the robot arm inside of Illustrator, but now we're essentially going to be doing it inside of Cinema 4D. And it's going to be the same concept that we used with the robot arm, as far as objects having to be parented, having like a parent-child relationship, right? But instead of using the Pickwick tool, which is that squiggly object on your layer inside of After Effects, to parent an object, like parent a layer to the other one, or how you can use the drop down menu. Instead of doing that, we're going to be dragging one object into another within the project menu. And so I'll go over that here in just a little bit, but let's just look over this module real quick. So this is kind of the image of what we're going to be doing here. Today we're going to be talking about the modeling and rigging process, and then hopefully we get a chance to just keep this a 2-class project and get to the animation for next week. And so if you guys want to kind of get ahead, here is the complete process video where you can follow along. You can rig it inside of Cinema 4D. And then you can, there's multiple versions of this inside of Canvas right now. So you have 1, 2, 3, I think 3, 4 even right there of how to model. Actually, this one is just putting a face, different strategies for putting faces on your bots. And this is how to animate, like a different version of how to animate it. And this video up here is from last semester on how to animate. And this one is from last semester on how to model and rig. And so we're going to kind of be following this model a little bit more closely than the past ones, but let's get right to it. Well, first let me real quick look at the deliverables here. So we want one MP4 of your Eve inspired bot flying in to the scene, looking around the scene. So there's like 3 different things here happening, right? It's going to be flying in, looking around, and then flying off screen, which we will get to the animating part on Thursday. But the, our standard 1920, 1080, 24 frames a second. Set the frame rate, remember, in 3 different places inside of the project, the render settings, and then After Effects, important as well. And then you're going to import the image sequence, interpret the footage, yada, yada, yada. We've been doing it all semester. And then I want to see a small version uploaded to Slack and then a full-size version inside of Canvas. So let's just kind of jump right into everything. Let me see here. One moment. I have my project file kind of set up, right? So I have my main project, which is labeled Eve Modeling and Rigging in Cinema 4D. And then inside of there, I have a folder for assets for my Cinema 4D files. I will for After Effects once I, create an After Effects file. Then we have a render folder, and inside of that render folder is a folder that says PNG sequence. So I can keep not only my rendered PNGs in there, but also then my final MP4s once those are rendered out. All right, let's get going. Now, if there's anyone in the chat, say hello, because I can actually see the chat today. So I'm going to bring up Cinema 4D here. Let me just adjust something real quick. I'm going to mute my mic. Give me a second. I am still here. I'm just adjusting my little leg thing here so I can rest it. So 1 minute again. All right, so I can be adjusted here and just kind of start working. Let me move my screen. It's just, a little getting used to stuff. Okay, so parenting inside of Cinema 4D looks a little bit different from what you would normally see inside of After Effects. And so I'm going to just throw a cube in here to kind of give you guys a demonstration on and what parenting looks like. So I've got a cube here, and let's just put a cone. Move that cone out of the way. We'll rotate it here as well. 90 degrees. Now let's say I wanted the cone to move along with the cube. And instead of, like I said, using the pick whip, which is this little tool inside of After Effects on your layer that looks like a spiral. Instead of using a pick whip, we don't have that here. This is a little bit more of a simple concept inside of Cinema 4D. And what you want to do, I can't zoom in unfortunately, but up in the, when you select an object like the cone, and I want to make this cone a child of the cube, I'm going to click here and drag it over the cube. Now notice how the arrow kind of changes. When the arrow is pointed when the arrow is pointed in a left direction, that means that I'm just going to move the layer. But if I drag it up and highlight it over the other layer, the cube, the one I want to be the parent, you'll notice a downward arrow. And I just let go of that, and it's going to create that hierarchy here, where now if I select the cube and rotate the cube, it is parented. It is the parent of the cone. You know, the concept is the same in After Effects when it comes to parenting. As far as the parent controls the children, but the children also have independent motion, right? So if I were to animate the rotation of the cube, that would be fine. But then I could also animate the rotation, let's say, of the cone separately. So you still have those controls over the objects, in just a different way. Let me just back up here. Now, the robot design isn't a super complex design, right? If we look at Eve, if I bring up the example here, and we look at Eve, she's smooth, right? But they're very simple shapes that we have going on here. Nothing too complex that we can't work with. And we briefly saw some smoothing inside of Cinema 4D in our past project when we were working with the dice, right? The dice was a cube that was inside of something called a subdivision surface. Now, let me see here. we want to essentially, for this project, what we're going to do is take these primitive shapes, which are all of the shapes inside of this object tab right here, right? All of these are primitive shapes, which means they don't have a lot of surfaces here. Each, like this cube, for example, has 6 sides to it. There's not any other division of these surfaces. If I were to select a panel of this cube, it would be 1 full size, which I can do now because I'll get to in a second on how to do that. But it's, you know, it's only 6 sides to this cube. And we want to essentially create something. We're going to block out Eve with using cubes, and we want to smooth them out. And a principle that you guys should really put in your notes here is the following. Ooh, I guess my caps lock is on, and then let me just scale this down right there. A single polygon cannot be bent. So let me show an example of this. I'm going to take this cube and I'm going to stick a deformer. I'm going to stick this bend deformer on this cube. And in fact, I am going to make the bend deformer a child of this cube here. And if I go down here into the mode and I start to increase and decrease the strength, notice that it is deforming the cube that I have, but it's not actually bending the cube, right? If it were to bend the cube, it would follow this shape right here. I know that's not a very clean shape, but it would follow this arc, right? And it doesn't. It follows a straight line. So it's not technically bending the shape. It's you know, it's skewing it, but it's not really bending it. And it goes with the fact that, you know, a single polygon cannot be bent. And each one of these sides, the 6 sides, is one single polygon. Now, if I were to take this cube and select the cube up in the Object tab, and I were to increase the segments, let's say we want to see these segments on here. So in order to do that, we're going to hit NB. N as in Nancy, B as in boy. And that's just going to bring up our garage shading, but we can also see the lines on this as well, right? And so we see that I've increased the segments for the X. Now let's increase the Y to about 6. Let's just put 6 in throughout all of this. So I've increased how many segments are each on this cube. 6 on the X, 6 on the Y, and 6 on the Z. And now if I go back into my bend deformer, if I select that, and I start playing around with the strength, notice how it actually starts to bend the object, because now I have more than one polygon. I have 6 polygons on each side of that, right? So it'd be 6 cubed, right, would be, or, you know, 6 by 6 by 6. I have 216 different polygons on this cube right now. And so if I wanted to make that smoother, I could go into the cube and just increase these even more. And notice how it smooths that curve out, that arc that's happening right there, right? And so that's the you know, general gist of how geometry really works inside of Cinema 4D, and how we can take that geometry and essentially manipulate it so that we can get these different shapes. Now, what we're doing here, we're increasing the segments to this, but it's not really like if I were to delete the bend out of here, and we have all these separate segments, but they're not really separate. They are separate polygons. Let me see here. But basically, let me see. Let me type this out for you guys. Again, what you want in your notes, a single polygon cannot be bent. You need to subdivide to create curvature, right? And that's what we did by increasing the segments on this. Now, this is the most important part right here to remember. If you're going to remember anything, just remember, it doesn't mean to be an arrow. I'm trying to just highlight underneath. But subdividing creates the curvature. This is a note that you guys need to remember for any time you're working in Cinema 4D and you're starting to model something. Now, let's take this. We're going to be using not the bend deformer today, but we're actually going to be using the subdivision surface. And so what the subdivision surface does is that smooths out the object. No matter what object that we put in there, right? Before I had the cube, so let me show you guys what this looks like. If I had a subdivision surface in there, I drop the cube in, it's going to smooth that out. It's going to divide all of those polygons and those segments that we had in here. So if I took this and put it down to 2, 2, 2, notice how it gets softer around the edges. And then as I increase these segments, it's going to increase essentially the stiff, or like the flatness on the outside, because we're creating more polygons to be smoothed out. And so it's kind of creating more of a gradated smoothing effect versus if there were only one segments for each one, it will fully smooth that out and create a sphere, right? Now notice that this subdivision surface is green, whereas the deformer is purple. Something to note in here, that if it's green, it has to be the parent, right? If I were to drop the subdivision surface into the cube, right? Right now, the order I have it is that the cube is a child of the subdivision surface, right? But if I were to take this cube out and make the subdivision surface a child of the cube, it wouldn't actually smooth it. So that's something you guys need to know. If you've got your cube here and your subdivision surface here, and you just drop this and make it a child of the cube, it's not going to work. It has to go the other way around, right? So I'm going to drop that right in there. Now, it's smoothing everything out. But let's smooth it. Let's change the way we add the polygons, not inside of the cube, but let's do it from the subdivision surface, right? And so I'm going to increase, well, here, no, let's do this. Let's increase these segments here. Let's do like 4, 4, 4, right? So we have like a nice smooth out cube, very smooth rounded edges there. Now, if I were going to the subdivision surface and I were to increase this right here, how many times it's subdividing that geometry, right? If I go all the way back to 0, it is flat because there is no division of the polygons happening. But as soon as I start to move forward, it's dividing and then dividing again and then dividing again and creating more and more geometry each time that I increase this. And notice there's a viewport one and a render one. You want these always to match, right? But if when I'm bringing this up, it's getting smoother and smoother until the object is as smooth as it can get. Now this works with other geometry as well. To kind of give you guys a better understanding, if I were to take a like cone again, move the cone over here. The cone is very sharp edges right here, right? And it's got a sharp point. If I increase the segments here, let's increase it to, we'll just keep it at 4, what it was at. And remember with circular objects, there's a rotation segment as well, which is how many segments are rotated around. And so I could increase that to like 20, right? Oh, not 520, just 20. And then that's going to slowly start to smooth that out. But remember that the more geometry you have on an object, the more time it's going to take to render that object, because that's just more data points and more vertices and different planes and edges that the software has to take into account when it's rendering stuff. But with the subdivision surface, it's like adding an effect onto the object that you have here. And so it's better for rendering and smoothing things out. So if I were to take this and drop it into the, and you notice you have to kind of, let me see here. If I drop it under if I make the cube the parent to the cone, and the cube the child to the subdivision surface, it affects both of them. And so it'll just carry on that process if I add another one in here, like a cylinder, right? Cylinder's already kind of smooth, but if I were to drop this into the cube, then it would kind of become like almost, it looks like a sleeping bag, in my opinion. Like that's the first thing I thought of when I looked at it. Or like a rolled blanket or a rolled towel there. And so this is how we're going to get that smooth look to our EveBot, right? We're going to create some primitive geometry like cubes, and then we are going to subdivide those cubes in the subdivision surface in order to create a smooth look to our EveBot. And so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about modes here. You know, we're going to be manipulating the geometry a little bit more. And we've been so far using up here object mode pretty much this entire time. But there are 3 different modes up here to look at that we can start using once we start working with these objects. Now, this one right here is, let me zoom in again, do this. We have point mode, edge mode, and polygon mode. Right now I'm in polygon mode. I'll put it back into object mode here. But you're going to want to write these down. Let me put this. Let me do a couple things. Let me delete all this real quick. Clear my area off. Okay. We have point mode, edge mode, and polygon mode. We also have this one that we're selected on right now is there's 5 total. So there's object mode, and then there's like a texture mode or material mode, which we will get to a little bit like closer to the end of class. And so when you're inside of object mode, you move the entire object. When you're inside of polygon mode, you can move the face of an object. And you'll understand here in a little bit more. When you're in edge mode, you move the edges of an object, and when you are inside of point mode, you can move and manipulate points. So now let's create that cube again. Let's increase our segments to 4, 4, 4. So we have 4 here. And I want to select this face right here, right in the front. Now, if I go and select my primitive, and then I go and select my polygon mode, you would think that I could select this polygon, but I cannot. And the reason is that this object has not been converted, right? It's a primitive, but we need to essentially convert it into an editable object in order to change either edges, points, or polygons, right? Here's, here, let me do it. It's easier to look at this as well. We have edges, right? We have points right here. These would technically be points if these are geometry that are added in. And then we have polygons, which are in essentially this entire face. The entire facing panel is essentially a polygon, right? And so in order to make this editable, we need to select our object and we hit C on the keyboard. And notice that all of a sudden, because I was in polygon mode, I have the ability to select a polygon or select 2 or 3 or 4 polygons. And let's say I wanted to extend this section outside of my cube. I'm just going to highlight those polygons. And then what's nice about it is all of our transform options like move, rotate, and scale will work with this. And so I can have it in move mode, and I can select these polygons and move them outwards and create essentially a different shape here. And let's say I wanted to move this one out and extend it out here. And then I wanted to take this one, and let's move around. This one at the top, and I want to drag it out this way. Right? Now, it also works with the rotation. Let's say I wanted to rotate this object or this corner. I wanted to select this one and rotate this one down. You know, you kind of get where I'm going at there. I don't, let's say I want to scale it, right? I want to scale the sides in that way. Scale it down so it's really thin. The back scale doesn't work on this right now in Z space because it's not really protrude. It just more or less has these two options, the X and the Y, to rotate it, but or to like scale. But you can still possibly scale in Z space if you're selected, if it's oriented differently. Let me see here. Let me try this. No. Doesn't work like that one. Notice how it's kind of working, right? You just can't, it's not very noticeable. It's scaling this one down inwards and then out. It's just kind of funny. The where you're going to get the changes is really doing that. And then I can rotate these again too, remember? Now, it goes the same with edges. Like, let's say I wanted to select an edge. Notice how it highlights that edge, and I can select and shift select. And, well, let's say I wanted to just move this edge out, or I wanted to rotate this edge since we're already on there. I can start to rotate that edge. I can hit E, and I can drop that edge down, or protrude that edge out specifically, or push it up. You know, the move, rotate, scale really works for edge and polygon. When it comes to point modes, when I select a point or 2 points here, right? When we were making the rugs, we did this. It's only going to work with the move tool. It's not, because there is no, you can use the rotation and stuff like that. It'll move when you've already got it protruded out. But if I were to take this one right here and start to rotate it, it's not going to do anything, right? Because it hasn't been changed in any way. If I were to take this one, though, and turn it certain ways, it won't work. If you're selected on a single vertice instead of multiple. Like if I hold shift and select multiple, that rotation will work. The scale should work possibly as well, but not not if you're selected on one at a time. And so that is how you essentially manipulate your basic geometry of an object, right? You remember to make it editable by hitting C, just C, and then going into the specific mode that you want to select, and then you go down and you select those whatever your mode is in, right? If I'm in the edge, I select the edges. Polygons, select the polygons, and so on and so forth. Now, blue objects are always primitives. So if I were to add the capsule in, right, that's the primitive object. Primitives are basic shapes, right? I'm hoping you guys understand that by now. And notice though, when I changed, if I make another cube here and I move it, if I make a primitive shape, up here at the top, you can see that it's still like a little cube, but then as soon as I hit Z or C on here, the icon changes to this little triangular shape with dots around it. And that is the icon that is for an editable mesh. You guys should write this down. This should be a notebook thing. Essentially, when you do that, when you create that editable mesh by hitting C, it becomes a pile of points, edges, and polygons to which we can manipulate, right, with our different modes. Now, let me go back here. Let me delete that cube. Now I'm going to drop this. I've edited this shape, right? It's kind of funny looking. It's not anything in particular. I wasn't going for anything. I just started moving stuff around. But let's go ahead and drop this into a subdivision surface. So I'm going to create that sub D surface. You'll also hear me call it that. And I'm going to parent that. I'm going to create the child as, or the cube I will make the cube a child of the subdivision surface. And notice how it smooths it out all of a sudden. So now we have way more organic shape versus when it was outside of the sub D surface, right? But guess what? We still have the options to play around with those different modes. So if I go back into polygon mode and I select the cube, oh, I'm in object mode, and I start moving around, notice how all of a sudden I have different sides and selections I can pick. It's kind of weird in some of these spots because of the way that I manipulated the vertices and as well as the polygons. If I go more around to a flatter shape here, you guys will see kind of what I'm talking about on a flatter edge. So I can still grab this and I can still move this out. Notice that it works alongside of that subdivision surface, right? You know, you can still rotate it here. And this is really how you get these primitive shapes. You convert them to an editable mesh, and then you throw them in a subdivision surface, and all of a sudden you have this very like organic looking shape. Now, the Eve bot is by no means organic, an organic shape. She's still a mechanism. She's a robot, but she's very smooth, right? If we were creating something like a robot with hard edges, we might not need to use this technique, but it's still important when creating, when modeling in general inside of Cinema 4D. And so if you didn't want to see these polygons, let's say I wanted to hide them to see what my shape looks like without this, I can hit N as in Nancy A, and then you will see the shape for what it is. It looks like a weird, like just stone or tooth or something, like ugly, an ugly tooth, but definitely just more of like an organic shape, right? This has no, obviously is nothing, but it's just an example to see the concept. Now, if I want to see those lines again, I'm going to hit N as in Nancy, B as in boy, and you can bring those lines back up to see all of your polygons. Or if you come up here to display and you go down to Gerard shading with lines, you can also select it that way. And so let's have that turned on. And I deleted that cube. Let's save our project here so that we have it. We start off on the best foot possible. So let's actually, we're going to save it in just a second. I want to kind of, let's start something first. So let's start to model Eve. So let's create another cube. And before we hit C, here's an important thing to remember. Before changing an object, spell words, into an editable mesh, you want to increase the segments on the primitive, right? We want to increase how many polygons are on here already. So let's go into, we're going to select that cube we just made, and we are just going to make, let's see here. Let's do 3. 3, 3, 3. Okay. And then we're going to go up here and we're going to hit C. We're going to create that as an editable mesh. And I'm going to make sure I'm in object mode right here so that I can just move the entire object at first. But this gives you more points, right? The more segments you add to this cube, the more points that you have the ability to control within that subdivision surface. And the relationships of the edges is super important when controlling how the subdivision surface smoothing works. So so I've got this cube. Let's throw it into a subdivision surface again. And let's hit our edge mode here. And in order to, we want to select the edge, but we want to select the edge that goes all the way around the object and kind of loops around the object instead of just one little segment here, right? We want all of these selected instead of going and holding shift and selecting each one separately. There's an easier way to do that, and that is by hitting the following shortcut, which is UL, which equals loop select. And so I will just unselect those, and I'm going to hit UL, UL, and then notice how all of a sudden when I hover over each one of these, it can select it as an entire loop, right? And so I'm going to select this one right here, and I'm going to hit E for the move tool. And notice what happens when I start to move this up. All right, here is something for you guys to know. We're actually going to talk about this later as well. I started to move this this right here, and nothing happened. Why isn't anything happen? Oh no, don't freak out, right? It's because we're actually in anchor point mode, and we do not want that. And anchor point mode happens to be right up here, right? And so what we're going to do in order to shut anchor point mode off is just click on that. So it's no longer purple. It's no longer highlighted. And then when I move this, you can see that it's actually changing the where in space those edges are. And actually, I am going to, let's see if I can change I cannot change them, right? I can't change the segments on here. Let me delete this cube. We're going to do we're going to just do, let's create another cube real quick. Let's only put 2 segments. 2, 2, 2. All right. Because then it'll be a little bit easier to see. I'm going to drop that into the subdivision surface. I'm going to hit C to make it editable. We're going to hit UL to select the cube. We're going to hit UL to select that loop around there, that loop edge. We're going to hit E to move that. And then notice, you know, I had said that the relationship of the edges is really important when controlling how the subdivision surface works. Because if I take this edge and I start to move it up, notice it kind of makes like an upside down, almost like a bowl or a coffee mug shape, right? But if I move this down, it's going to make almost like a gumdrop shape. And then, so the relationship from these edges is vital when it comes to moving around in the subdivision surface. Notice if I move it this way, and that shape all of a sudden starts to change what they start to look like, right? And so if I go back, and by moving this center edge here, right, it allows us to control the resulting curvature of the object and how it looks. And so if we want this to look more like Eve's body, right, we move this upwards. And if we want it to look like Eve's head, we would move the center edge downwards. And so then if I were to take this, if I were to move it down to look like her head, or like a Roblox head, right, and I were to take this out of the subdivision surface, notice that it's still a cube. The cube has not changed, but where the center line of that cube is has changed. And so if I move this all the way up, right, see, moving up and down, if I move this all the way up and then throw it into the subdivision surface, then all of a sudden we have something that's going to start looking like Eve's body. And so now let's start modeling her body, right? This is essentially what we're going to be using this tactic by selecting edges and polygons, and possibly points. to create her body and her arms and her head. So let's just kind of get started on that. Let me move this around here. And we're going to delete these again. Those were just kind of examples. And I'm going to just go into my four views here, where I have perspective, I have the top view, I have the front view, and I have the right view. And I am going to, I have a reference image that I found online. Now, when you're looking for a reference image, it is okay if you do not find one that is straight ahead. I happened to find one that was straight ahead. If I go into my browser and I type in Eve from WALL-E, and I go under images, there's a lot of different images that we have here. We're not going to be modeling from, we're going to be looking at this, but we're more paying attention to proportions instead of using this as like a full template on how to model Eve's body and her just her in general. And so you can just right click, save an image as something. I have in my assets folder inside of my project folder, my main project folder, right? And it's good to have one from possibly the actual, because if you look here, Eve's a little squashed on this little section. She's a little squashed right there because it's more of like a toy, mini toy. So, you know, you can find images from the movie, or you can find some of these images. It looks like people have modeled these and put them up on 3D modeling sites as well. But I've saved some of these. And the nice thing is that inside of Cinema 4D, they've made an update where you can now just click and drag and drop images into like a panel, right? So let's say I've got this head on one. I just drag it and I drop it into Cinema 4D here, and it automatically adds it as like a reference point, right? This is a reference that we want to see. Now, I want to update this because it's really bright and I don't need it to be that big. I don't need it to be this opaque. I kind of want to change the transparency of this. And so make sure that you're dropping it, first of all, into the front view here. Always, you know, be dropping those into the front view. Any kind of reference image will always go in the front view. And in order to adjust this image, I'm going to hit Shift V as in Victor, and that's going to bring up the viewport settings right here. And I am going to go to back, and this is where it puts the image inside of here. And I am just going to change the size, probably down. I don't want it this big. I'm going to 600 by 600, remembering to keep these equal. And then I'm going to let's do 500 by 500. There we go. So I can see a little better. I'm going to increase that transparency so that I don't really have to see. It's not that big. I'm not focusing on the image as much as I'm going to be focusing on my geometry. And so what we want to do with this is we are going to block out. We want to block out the shapes of Eve using primitives. And then we'll proceed to drop it into a subdivision surface and then adjust things as we go. But before, you know, I had held off on saving, and there's a reason why, is because I want you guys to save this with any assets, right? So I'm going to go up here to File, and I'm going to Save Project with Assets. And then I would go into the folder that I want to have it. And I would name this Eve. And then I would proceed to save it here. Now, my folder happens to be set up where I'm not going to be moving the assets away from the project file ever. And so I don't actually have to do that, but I want you guys to get used to saving things with assets. And so, and we're also going to be working on saving things incrementally. And I don't know if you guys, when playing video games, if you've created separate save files, at different points in the game, so you can visit different points. Like right now, I'm replaying The Last of Us, the part 1, and I like to have 2 to 3 save files that I'll either overwrite or that I can go back to a different point in the game, a previous point in the game, if I ever feel like I missed something or had to go back for some reason, or I'm stuck in a certain place. It's just like it's a it's like a safe. It's like creating a safety for saves. And so we'll be, after we save this initial one, we're going to be saving incrementally. So I'm going to save mine inside of here, and I'm just going to rename this Eve Bot. There we go. All right, saved. We have everything set up here. I'm going to delete this subdivision surface because we'll be adding a new one. Now, let's kind of block this out with primitives, right? So we're going to add a cube into here, and notice that the cube's outline shows up in each one of these views. I have the cube right here, here, so on and so forth. And let's dial it in so it's about the same. Let's dial in the shape of this cube so it's about the same proportion as Eve's body right now. And we're going to be using the size parameters of the X, Y, and Z of the cube here to do that. And so I'm going to we'll increase the X a little bit there. Mostly the Y I'm concerned about. And remember that when changing these, let's put it back to 200. I think the thickness is good there because she looks a little plumper. I'll put 250. There we go. Can always change it a little bit later with the transform if I want to. And then I just don't want this to be quite as long. You do want it to be a little bit longer than what your object is, because once we put it into the subdivision surface, remember it's kind of going to shrink that shape slightly. And so we want to just kind of keep that in mind while we're blocking this out. And so then I want to go up here and I want to rename this cube to body. Body, yada, yada. There we go. And then I am going to, let's control drag this cube to kind of get to the arms, or alt drag. Oh, no, not alt drag. Shift, there we go. So also I need you guys to know this as far as shortcuts, because I use shortcuts often. And sometimes that happens where I mess up the view, right? So if you hit Control plus Z, that is going to undo any changes that you have made to any kind of objects inside of Cinema 4D. If you hold down Shift plus Control plus Z, that is going to go back a step on any kind of changes that you've made to your view, right? If I rotated the view of my camera inside of here, right? Like, let's say I'm selected in this panel, and then I move it here, and I'm too far out. All of a sudden, I'm like, if I hit Shift Control Z, it'll go back to the previous view. If I hit it again, it'll go back again, so on and so forth. And so that is kind of what you're going to need to do when it comes to changing your, like, going back on your viewport. It's just a good shortcut to remember, as well as Control Z. Notice I accidentally tapped this over. I didn't want that. I hit Control Z, and that's going to change where my actual object. It's going to not change where it's going to go back a step. And so, but I want to duplicate this cube, and so I'm going to hit not Alt, dang it, Shift Control Z, Control drag. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm going to drag this over to kind of match where that arm is right there. And then we're obviously going to scale in the X in here. We want it quite a bit thinner. Move that back over here. Increase it a little bit, or decrease the height. Move it up. Move it back in a little bit. Increase that X again. Let's put it at 50. And then we can just adjust things as we start moving along here. My mouse, I'm not sure if my mouse is dying or what's happening, but it just kind of keeps getting stuck there. Let's put this at 250. Yeah, that's about good. It's a little bit bigger than what we need. In fact, this one, the body, oh, rename that one. Body, yaddy, yaddy. We're going to rename this layer arm, right arm, right? Because it's going to be her right arm. Select that body. Let's shorten that up just slightly. So instead of 358, let's do 325. All right, that's pretty good. Because we'll move that down there. Yeah, that's not bad. And then we want to take that right arm and let's duplicate that one and move it over. So holding down Control, you'll click and drag that over this way. And I kind of want to put it right about there. About in the same spot. And then we'll create the head. So, or well, let's rename this layer to left arm. And then let's create the head. I'm going to take the body this time and I'm going to Control drag upwards. Kind of to where my like the anchor point of that object is at the center. And then I'm going to decrease the size down quite a bit. Right about there. That's good. Bring in the, so 150. 165. That looks better. And then just bring it in on the edges a little bit more, so 225. Not bad. All right, that's not terrible there. I'm going to save that. And rename this one head. All right. Now, let's we want to group all of these, right? Let me go back to this view right here. Pull out there so you guys can kind of see. Look, I have a Minecraft guy. No, I'm just kidding. So I want to group these all together, and so I'm going to select them all. And then I'm going to hit Alt-G, and that's going to create a group, like a null, with all of these objects inside of it. And then let's rename this to Eve, right? Because now it's all attached. Everything's attached to each other or within the same group. So I'm going to rename that to Eve. And then I'm going to just open that up there so we can kind of see what it looks like. And let's go ahead and drop this whole entire group into the subdivision surface there. And there we go. We have Eve. She's ready to go. JK, you know, it looks like BD1 a little bit more. It actually looks more like a droid, but not quite like Eve yet. And so we're gonna fine tune this right now, right? It doesn't look amazing, but through changing the edges and changing the polygons, we're going to be able to create something that looks more like this. So let's select the body and let's update the segments on it. Let's update the Y segments so that we have 2 to 3 different segments there. Notice how all of a sudden it's increasing like the shape looks a little bit different. It's a little smoother, right? Because we're increasing the segments. We don't want to quite make it an editable mesh just quite yet. We want to just increase those segments. And so I'm going to do the same thing to the right arm, the head, and the body as well. I'm going to put these all at 3. And you really only need, all you need to do is increase it on the Y. We don't really have to increase the X or the Z, just because Eve is pretty simplistic. And we're not going to be changing a whole bunch of polygons and stuff on from different planes. So then I'm going to go to the right arm, increase those segments to 3. You can do 2 if you want. It doesn't matter. Either one works. And then 3 again. And so it looks a little funny now. So let's kind of make this a little bit nicer. Let's select that body, and we're going to create an editable shape. In fact, let's do it to all of our objects right there. And we'll work on this body first. Let's go back into our 4-view mode and make sure that we're selected on edge mode and hit UL so that we can select the looping edge, right? And we're going to grab this right here. We're going to grab that top one and we're going to hit E. And we're going to drag that up. And notice what it starts to do with the shape. It starts to kind of flatten that area out there. We're going to grab this part right here, holding UL, select that one, hit E. We're going to bring that kind of down. We're going to bring that, actually, let's bring that up a little bit more. Because all of her width is really up at the top. She's kind of like a carrot shape or like a strawberry, right? The shape of a strawberry. And so if you only have 2 segments, you only have to move one up. But if you have the 3 segments in there like I do, I'm just going to have a little bit more control on making this shape a little bit more accurate. And so I'm going to take that bottom center loop and I'm just going to drag that up as well to about the center of her body. UL, even if you're in this view, you still have to hit UL to select it as a loop, right? Even though we're just looking at the front. Because if I were not to do that, if I were to have selected just this part here and I go out of this view and into this view and start to move around. Oh no, it did select them both, but that's okay. Let's, nice. Did work. It's still in the loop select. If you also want to see, you can select them. There's different ways to select edges and polygons and vertices as well up here under your regular selection tool. There's this one where you can hit, get that loop select up there as well. And so I'm going to get that, hit E on my keyboard for the move, and I'm going to bring that up just slightly more. Bring this one up. Oh, I'm not in the loop select. I didn't hit UL. Grab that one. E. Bring it up a little bit more. There. All right. So the body's kind of matching a little bit more. We're getting there, right? Let's take the arms real quick. And let's move them. We've updated the segments. We've turned it into an editable object or an editable mesh. Let us hit, let's select this loop here, UL. And let's kind of move that one up, E. Bring that one up a little bit higher so it's kind of happening. I like to use the grid here to be able to see and make sure things are symmetrical and kind of lined up this way. But then notice how there's this curve. If I were to bring that image back up here, there's this curve that happens on her arm. It's not just fully straight down. It's very curved here. So we want to make sure that one of those lines is in this area where that center of that curve is so that we can move that edge outwards and create that curve and make that curve happen. And so I'm going to take this one that I moved up, and I'm just going to kind of bring it over here and notice how it's bending that way. I'm going to drop it down just slightly. And over here, right, I want to kind of bring that out as well. So that also has it's a smoother curve right there. Oh, and notice I didn't hit UL for loop select, and so it only moved this section, which I don't want. UL. The more edges and stuff you're working with, remember, the more vigilant you have to be when updating these shapes. So I'm going to bring that one over there. It's a little bit thick for me, so I'm going to go back into object mode, and I'm going to hit T for transform, and I'm going to just kind of scale that one down in. I don't like how. And then I actually want to scale it up a little bit because the arm's a little longer. I'm going to hit E and move that. Remember, if you want to move the entire object, you have to put it back into object mode up here. Object mode, moving the entire object. And we're not really going to worry about this left arm because I am actually going to show you guys how to create the left arm in a totally different way. And so actually I'm going to delete that left arm. You guys don't even have to do that. We'll just skip that step. And in fact, notice how this part of her arm is kind of in a little bit more, so I'm going to select the arm again. I'm going to go into edge mode. I'm going to hit UL, and I'm going to select that bottom edge right there. It's not going to let me in this view, so I am going to do it from a different view. Possibly moving this one upside down and selecting it like this. If you click on the, if you don't click specifically on the edge and you click on, like if you bring it into the space in between essentially, it will just select the edges around that plane, right? So that's how I grab that one there. And then I'm going to hit E for move, and I am going to look at my front view, and I'm going to move that in just a little bit. So it's kind of more like a nice curved wing. UL, select that one, and I think it looks okay. Looks pretty nice like that. It's very, very thick. Notice how on the side there it's way too thick. So let's select the entire object again. And let's thin that out. Let's hit T for scale, and we're going to bring that one in. So it's nice and thin there, which makes more sense with her body, right? If I move this around, that looks more appropriate as far as the proportions of what Eve looks like. I'm going to save this. And let's move to the head. Right? 1 second here. Let me take a drink. All right. Moving on to the head. We're going to select that head. And I am going to go into edge mode. Hit UL. I'm going to grab this top one right here and hit E. And I am going to hit E. Sorry, I did not hit that. I'm going to kind of bring that one down. I'm going to hit UL again. And I'm going to select this loop. Hit E again, and then bring this one down a little bit closer so it makes kind of more of this. You can work in between views. This is why I really enjoy having these 4 views open, is because you can just see it from different areas, and you can, as long as you click on each, when you're in each area and you click and you start to move around, right? I can move around this way. I can rotate it this way, and I can zoom in and out using my 1, 2, 3 and clicking and dragging. Hitting Shift Control Z undoes that. Let's move this back down a little bit so we kind of get more of like this flat edge there. UL. Let's bring this side down even more. E. Bring that down a little bit more. There. So we get this nice, like, kind of nice curve there where we're almost there. Not quite yet, but we're almost, right? We're going to fine tune this in just a little second. In just a minute. And so we have like this general shape. Let's kind of go and let's incrementally save right now. File, save increment. That's all you do. And then all of a sudden, if I go into where my Cinema 4D file is saved, it saves an increment of it. So all of a sudden I have from this one to this one. And so when you go to open them, you'll open the most recent incremental save that you have here. I can drop that down. Sorry, just adjusting a little bit. Now let's shape the body a little bit more so it's kind of got that tapered look down at the bottom here. Change my view there a little bit because I want it kind of angled. So I'm going to select the body. And let's go into polygon mode this time. And we are going to select the base of the actual object. So we're going to select the base part of the body. So I'm going to just go down there and select that like that. And I'm going to hit T for scale, right? Because I want to scale this down separately. And I'm actually going to scale it from both the X and the Z plane. So I believe it's this one right here. Yep. And then if I drag that in, notice it starts to taper that object in to the bottom. So it fits more of Eve's shape. It's definitely more of an Eve shape. It's slightly, if you look in, oh, Shift C, if you look right here, we kind of want it a little bit longer there. So I'm just going to hit E for the move tool, and I'm going to drag this down to really kind of match that shape that we have going on there. And then I am going to do the same, similar to the top. I'm going to select this top, and then I'm going to hit T, and I'm going to kind of bring this out a little bit more. Oh, let me see what it looks like here. Yeah, not bad. It flattened it out a little bit more. I'm going to hit UL and select loop mode. Go back into the edge, and I'm going to take this edge right here, hit E, and I'm going to drop it down a little bit. And then we're going to go back into the plane mode, and I am going to select this top plane again. Oop. Okay, select that plane. And I'm going to drop this down a little bit more there. And hit T. And let's scale it in. No, let's scale it out a little bit more. Right there is okay. I don't really want this like too much of a jutted out this way. In fact, I can select, I think UL will also select a loop. Let me see here. Ring selection. Let me see. Let's go back to object mode. Click off of it. If it's highlighting everything like that, just unclick of any objects inside of your object panel up in the upper right corner, and then reselect the body. Okay, and then that way, I'm in object mode right now, so it's selecting the whole thing. I want to go back into plane mode, and then I only want a section of this. I don't want the entire thing. And so if I go to, let's try loop select this way. Right now, see how it's selecting the loop that goes from all the way around this way? I don't want that one. Sometimes, there we go. Almost that one. That is a loop I want to grab. So I'm going to select these ones right here. Then I want to hit T. And then I'm just going to scale this out this way a little bit more. I think the Eve bot looks okay. I'm going to select the top plane again, and then I am going to bring that one back in a little bit so it's not quite, doesn't have that little weird edge there. I think that looks fine. She's about a good thickness here. I could probably make her a little bit thinner. So I'm going to select the entire object and look at my top mode right here, and I can just kind of bring that in just a little bit. So she's not quite as thick. There we go. I think she looks good like that. I think her body's pretty much set. I'm going to save. So it just kind of takes a little bit of like going back and forth, right? Going between polygon mode and edge mode and your scale and your move tool, and just kind of fine tuning it until it's about the same. Like, we don't really need it to fully match this image here, right? It's more about the proportions. I happen to have this fully front shape because, like, obviously, look, there's still parts of her that need to be extended out, and we can do that, right? If we go into edge mode and hit UL to select this edge right here, and then hit T to, we want to scale it, right? Scale it out this way. So we can do that a little bit more. And then if I go back into my 4 modes and then look here, all right, she still looks fine. Just looks good. Nice and smooth. No real issues there. So the appropriate thickness, you could even make her just slightly a little bit thicker around the base. There, hit UL and make her a little bit thinner. T at the top. Or a little bit thicker at the top. Do you see what I'm getting at? Like you can just adjust things as needed. I think that looks good right there. No changes needed. And now let's do the same essentially for the arm, right? Because the arm of her is tapered as well. And so I'm going to just kind of move it to this view right here. And then I'm going to go into polygon mode and select the right arm. And I'm going to click on the, I'm going to select this bottom one here. And then I do want to scale it in. So I'm going to just take that. If you grab one of these little corner edges and you scale, it will scale from 2 coordinates instead of just 1. And so I just pulled that in just a little bit and it tapered it nicely there. And let's go ahead and do the same up at the top. Actually, let's maybe move this out a little bit more. Just slightly. Doesn't need anything too crazy, right? Come on now, grab that. Just a little bit. You know, we've got the nice bend happening there. Slightly gets bigger up at the top, tapers down nicely at the base. Let's move this, hitting T. Let's select the entire thing, go back to object mode to select the entire thing, hit E, and just kind of, you know, you can move this in or out, but remember her arms aren't really attached, so, but that's good right about there. If we were to rotate it, you just don't want it really hitting the body. So just make sure that it's far enough that when you rotate it a little bit, it will not hit the body, because when we go to animate, we will be rotating and moving the arms around. And then let's do the same thing for the head now. So we're going to select the head. I'm going to go back into my 4 mode and kind of move around this way a little bit. Let's get back into our polygon mode. Let's select the head here and hit T. Let's scale this kind of in on all sides, so it's more of like a gumdrop shape. And then let's bring that down a little bit. So I'm going to hit E for my move tool, slightly bring it down. Let me select the base polygon right there and bring that up a little bit, because we want it pretty, well, actually down a little bit. We want it a little bit rounded there, nothing too drastic. Let me hit UL and select the edge mode and this center edge right there. Let's hit T and kind of scale it out a little bit, just slightly, kind of so it matches more of like what her head shape is. And I think overall her head seems a little bit, no, it's actually not that big. Her head seems fine, maybe in width back here. So we can just grab that Z scale, bring it in a little bit tighter. There we go. So her head's not too thick for her body, right? Looks nice. That looks great. Awesome head shape, better than what I've done before. I am proud. But yeah, it pretty much matches her head there. And so now we have the body, we have the head, we have one arm. Let's create a second arm. And so to do that, I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to deselect everything and go back into object mode, right? And so the mirroring, thankfully, is much easier than it used to be. It used to be that you would have to select the arm, you'd mirror it, then you'd have to do it on a certain plane specifically, and then you'd have to delete one, and it's not like that anymore. They've made an update, which is much easier. And so we want to select that right arm there. And again, making sure that you're in object mode. And you're going to hold down Shift-C for the search, and you're going to type in mirror. And notice like there's a bunch of these ones grayed out. These are not the ones that we're going to use. You're going to select this one right here that says mirror tool. And you're just going to, oh, let's see here. It went off there. You're just going to select that one and you just hit enter. And now all of a sudden we have this little panel that pops up here where we can mirror this object. Now, there's some settings in here that you have to make sure are happening in order for the arm to mirror itself from one side of the body to the other. And that happens to be, it has to be in world mode right here. If it's not in world mode, if it's in local mode, it will just mirror the object side by side. And we do not want that. We want it to, because essentially the center of the world is right here. So we want this object to be mirrored over onto this side of the body. And so these are the settings that you have to have in order to make it so it mirrors correctly. Right here, we have, you want to make sure that origin is in world mode, that coordinates are in world mode. Your axis has to be this one right here. You do not want any of these other ones. Nope, nope, no. In fact, no, we're going to change it to this one right here. We want it plus backslash minus. And you can leave children checked. It's not going to matter at this moment. I think that means that if there's any children attached to the object, that it would also mirror those as well. And, you know, that's not that big of a deal. We can just uncheck that here. And we can, as soon as I hit mirror, it's going to create another arm. Oh, you know what I didn't do is I didn't select that there. So make sure that it's selected like this. This is what you want to see. Exactly this. And then I'm going to hit mirror and voila, we have a second arm. Now before it used to be attached to the right arm and all this other stuff. Well, it is no longer. And so I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to rename this left arm. And it makes this, and I'm going to save this, right? It makes this process so much nicer because it automatically splits these layers for you. Where before, if I were to mirror this over here, right? And then I were to hide this arm object, this left arm that was mirrored. Oh, notice that one thing here is different, right? Their names are different. So let me just rename those. I named them inappropriately, or it just was opposite. So this one's right arm. This one here is left arm. And you'll know when you select it and you're like, oh, wrong arm. So you can just rename your layers and it should sort that out for you. This is the easiest, quickest way to do so. But now, if I were to hide this, left arm, there is nothing there. Versus before, when you would mirror it, there would still be an arm here that you would have to delete, and then you would have to unattach them from each other. It's not like that anymore, which is beautiful. I'm so happy it doesn't do that. Let me see here. Make sure those are saved there. Now is a good time, if you haven't saved yet, to save with assets, right? So it saves that image, this reference image, alongside of the actual project file. And if not, now is a good place to, and if you've already saved, now is a good place to incrementally save. And so we've gotten Eve all modeled. She looks awesome. Let's like parent her together, right? Because we are going to animate her. And so we have to do some rigging here. Parenting, rigging, same thing. From what we know about parenting, we have to take the arms and the head, because the body is going to control the motion, right? She moves from her body. She'll move from one place to the other using her body, and her head and her arms will follow. And so we're going to select the head and the arms, and we're going to shift and click and drag those and make them children of the body. And so now if I'm in object mode and I move the body around, it's going to move everything else with it. Whereas before, if I go back and I were to move the body around or move the, if I were to select the body and move this around, nothing goes with it. So again, click, shift, click, drag, make them children of the body. And so then we have the parenting all set, right? That's so much quicker and easier than in After Effects. But now we have to, like if I were to take the head, right? If I wanted the head to move and I were to rotate this, oh no, it's not rotating appropriately. It's not rotating from the correct spot. And so now I have to update the anchor points of the head and the arms so that they rotate from the appropriate location on the body. So the arms, we're going to need to rotate from the shoulders, and the head, we needed to rotate from the neck. Now, an important message, and I'm going to write this on here for you guys. Control 2. Let's increase this. Important. Great way to show importance, right? Increase the size, add exclamation points. Anchor points inside of After Effects, right, only have a position in space. But inside of Cinema 4D, anchor points have both a position and an orientation. This is really important when it comes to changing the anchor point and where it's at. We're not only going to change the position of the anchor point, but we also need to change how that anchor point is oriented, because the anchor point is an axis with a direction inside of Cinema 4D versus inside of After Effects, it is just a position in space. This one has an orientation, right? We're working in 3 dimensions, so we can orbit things, orbit that anchor point around and rotate it. And so we need it to be facing the correct position, or else the motion won't come from the right. The motion will not, it won't be correctly oriented, essentially, right? Like if it weren't oriented right, we'll show you here. Let's just kind of move on to it first. So I want to go into this view mode, and I want to go into the front view. And I want to change the position of this anchor point. Now, like I said earlier, right, if I were to move this right now, it's moving the object because we are in object mode. We want to go into anchor point mode right here. We need to highlight this, right? And so I'm going to select that right there. And now all of a sudden, if I take this and I move this down towards the bottom of her neck, it's moving the anchor point itself and not the actual object. So we want that to be at the base of the head. But then, yeah, so let's do that first. And then let's change the position that we want the arms to be at. So we're still in anchor point mode. I selected the right arm layer. And I'm going to bring this up. And then bring this in, because her arm kind of rotates from the center of nowhere and not necessarily the... no, these are right. You're going to want to make sure the position of your arms are in place before you mirror the arm, by the way. You want the position, all of it, to be the same before you start mirroring it, because if it's not set in stone, then you have to redo that again. But anyways, back to the anchor point of the arm. You want the joint essentially to be like right here on the inside edge so that it's rotating kind of like midair, right? And so I'm going to drop this down and use my graph points to kind of get a good area of what I want that to be, so that when I select the left arm, I can get that in the same position here. I think I moved it to right about there. So if I click and click, nope, it needs to go down a little bit more. Right to there, and then inwards a little bit. So when I look at this line right here, it should be this x-axis line should be right along the edge of the graph right here, because this is what I'm using as essentially like a point in space for me to reference for where I want those to be. So they're about in the same spot, right? Click there, about the same. We'll make sure it's about touching the edge right there. And the right arm, same. Just touching that edge. All right, cool. Now, if I were to go into here and hit R to rotate, and I were to start rotating, oh, nothing happened. Why did nothing happen? Because I'm still in anchor point mode. So now, if I want to start making changes to the object, I have to uncheck that anchor point mode. Good thing to remember. So, making sure you're out of anchor point mode. Don't freak out. Just make sure you check that first, right? And then if I start to rotate this, that's okay, but we still need to orient this anchor point. And so I'm going to go back into anchor point mode. And I'm going, not that, I'm going to go into my 4 views here. And I am going to hit T because I want to see kind of where, or E, I'm sorry, I want to see where that anchor point is facing backwards. It's facing at the back of Eve. And I want it to face I want it to be down, right? When it comes to a limb, the Z axis, I need to type this down for you guys. The Z axis needs to point down the limb so that so that when you start rotating things, they rotate properly. So it needs to kind of move down and kind of face that curvature of the limb. And then with the head, the Z axis needs to be oriented, yes, towards the front of Eve's body. Goodness gracious. Come on now. I'm gonna move my mic a little bit out of the way so I don't have to, so I can see my keyboard a little bit more. So this is important to remember when we start to change the orientation of these anchor points. And so I'm going to exit out of there. I'm in anchor point mode. The orientation of it is facing the back, and we don't want that. We want it to face down. And so I'm going to hit R here, and I'm going to hold down Shift and just move each. I'm going to move this 270 degrees, and then I'm going to hit E again to make sure that it is pointing down, which is perfect, right? I want to make sure that that Z-axis, that blue arrow, is pointing down the arm. And then I want to make sure that it's just kind of curved a little bit. So I'm going to hit R again, making sure to only move one axis at a time, because if you start moving more than one axis at a time, it becomes an issue. You just kind of rotate that just slightly. Let's undo that, and let's hold down Shift and do it again. So that we kind of get it to, we'll do 5 exactly, 5 degrees. And you can double check by hitting E and making sure that that arrow kind of starts to follow along where her arm, like that curvature of her arm, and it's pointing down. So we're going to do the same exact thing for this arm here. So I'm going to go back into this view. I am going to select her left arm. I am going to hit R, and then I'm going to select the X rotation axis, and holding down Shift, I am going to move it 270 degrees. I think that will work. Hit E to check. It did work. All right. Then I'm going to move to my front view, hit rotate again, start to rotate holding down Shift, and just go -5. And then when I hit E, it should start to follow that curve. Perfect. And so we have the anchor points oriented to the arms right now. Let's do the same for the head. So I'm going to select this, and notice that the arrow, the Z axis, is pointing towards the back part of Eve's body. Again, the back side. And so we are going to hit R again, and we're going to rotate that Y axis here, right? And I'm going to hold down Z, and I think or hold down shift, and I'm going to orient it, try 90 degrees first. Hit E to check. All right, we have to go 180 degrees total. So I'm going to hit R again, grab that Y, and I'm going to hold down shift, and I'm going to, again, rotate it another 90 degrees, because that'll be 180 degrees total. I hit E, perfect. Now that Z-axis arrow is facing in the correct direction for the anchor point. So I'm going to disable the anchor point tool right there. And now Eve looks great. Let's maybe we're going to incrementally save. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we essentially freeze this view into place, right? So actually, I'm going to increment and save now. Save incremental. Nah, I'm going to do it again after this. So I have one saved incrementally without me freezing these coordinates in place. But let's say that you're in the middle of animating and all of a sudden Eve starts to get out of whack and like her head ends up in a really weird place like this, and her body ends up in a really weird position, and you're like, oh, I can't figure it out. I can't go back. Nothing's happening. In order to make sure that you can get back to this original position, we are going to select everything inside of this object panel. Everything, all of the layers. And then we're going to go into coordinates right here. And we're going to drop down this freeze transform box. And we are going to select freeze all. And what that's going to do is it's going to freeze all of these coordinates right here the way they are. And so that way, if I end up all in a weird situation where things are discombobulated and all out of whack, and she's having like a malfunction, we can go back to the original setting. So how do you do that? Let's say, by the way, I incrementally saved after I did that. Let's say that her arms all rotated funny, her head is rotated, and also moved all, transformed all weird, moved all weird. And I'm like, how do I get back? I hit Alt 0. Whoop, Alt 0. Come on now. Select all of these and hit Alt 0. And it should bring it back to the normal. Now, it didn't happen for the... You got to make sure you don't do it then with the scale. I didn't realize it doesn't change back the scale. So make sure that you don't do this with the scale. You know, but you want to select all of these and hit Alt plus 0, and that'll just move everything back to its original space. So I'm going to unselect all of these, move around here. Nice. Everything looks good. And so let's do like a quick review. There's a lot of information there. Let me see here. Kind of what we did, right? So far we've blocked out Eve. We've refined the subdivisions, sub-Ds. Then we went through and refined the edges and polygons. And then we mirrored the arm. And then we rigged and parented layers, right? And then we adjusted and oriented the anchor points. And then finally we froze the transforms properties into place, right? So you want to make sure that you do all of this stuff before we get to the next part, which is we're going to create a controller. And then we're going to throw in a scene here, and we're going to kind of rig it up so that she has a point in space to look at, right? All right, you guys, I'm going to take just a quick second here to just adjust how I'm sitting and take a real quick drink. So one moment. All right, so let me exit out of there. Don't forget to incrementally save. All right. So let's go ahead and make a controller for Eve. Oh, how do I want to do this? So we're going to create like a target essentially that Eve can look at, right? Like, so think of Eve as her head. Think of her head as like a target light, right? You know how if you have a target placed in your scene and like a target light placed in your scene or a target camera, and you can change or move the target. But once you have the target in place, as soon as you start to move the camera around or the light around, it will it always looks at that target. We're essentially going to do the same thing for Eve, but we're going to be using a target tag. And so how we do that is we want to select her, we're going to select her head. And we're going to hit Shift C. And, well, here, hold on. Let's go back real quick. I want to explain why we're going to create this target tag, right? Because we're going to be animating this. We're going to be animating Eve onto the screen, and then she's going to look around a little bit, and then she's going to animate off screen, right? And instead of having to animate not only like her position, but her head rotations, which can be a lot. If we just animate, if we have a target on her head, right, or a target tag attached to her head, if we change where the body position is, her head will always be looking at that target. And so it eliminates the process of having to animate a bunch of rotational keyframes on her head. And so let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a quick null. And let's rename this to look target. And we want to take this target, we want to select it, and we want to move this target in front of Eve and kind of up at her head level. So I'm going to go back into my views here. I'm going to move that upwards. So it's kind of like right in between her eyes, right? Where we want it to be centered. And remember, this object is, I'm not looking at the picture anymore. I'm looking at the geometry, and I'm updating where this target tag is based on the geometry. In fact, I might move it further away a little bit. Let's go up to this top view. No, I think that's a perfect space for now. And so we've moved this null essentially out from her body and up to eye level or head level, right? And up until this point, nulls have been kind of empty, right? Just this little dot here. But we can change that. And so making sure that null is selected, you want to come down here and into shape. You want to switch that and make it like a circle or a hexagon or something. You just want to be able to see that. Notice how it's changed that shape there for us. So now we can visibly see kind of what it looks like. So we have a sphere here. Let's go ahead and, oh, I did not want to do that. Let me move a little bit more there. We want to make sure it's right now it's always oriented towards the camera, and we don't want to do that. We want it to always be oriented towards her face. And so you just want to put that onto the Z orientation so that that circle is always facing Eve's face. Because if not, then you know, things will get a little dicey once we start to animate. So making sure that the orientation is on Z. And let's just increase that size of the circle so that we can see it a little bit more. I'll put it at 25. So that way it's easier just to see in space for us. Now this is not something that is going to show up in the render. It's essentially just like a visual marker in space for us to look. And now we want to essentially like link this target, this look target, to her head. And so you're going to select the head and you're going to hit Shift C and we're going to type in target. And you want to make sure that you're selecting this target and not the MoGraph. You do not want this one. No, no, no. We want this one right there. And so I'm just going to hit Shift C again. It'll come up. I'm going to double click on this and it's going to add that target tag to her head. We want that on the head layer, right? And this is going to allow the head to look at this tag whenever we assign it to the specific target, right? And so I want to notice that there is a spot right here for which you can assign this target tag to. And we want to assign our look target to this target tag. So with this target tag selected, we're going to click and drag that look target into this target object drop down space right there. And so then now if I select this null and move this null, notice how she starts to look at the object, right? If I were to select Eve and move her body, she will always be looking at this object. Her head starts to move, and she's always going to be looking at that object. Let's get her centered back in there, making sure that I am that target tag. Make sure I didn't go back too far, which I did not. And I'm going to save this right here. We're going to incrementally save. But you guys can see how that target tag comes in handy. And now let's kind of set the scene. You know, we're ahead of schedule. So we're going to set the scene here for Eve. Oh, nice. So I didn't realize this, but if you don't hold anything down, nope, wrong T right here. Without holding down anything in C4D, I just found this shortcut out while accidentally hitting it. If you press 1 through 4 on your keyboard, it will change your view, right? And so let's say I want to get back to the original view. I'm going to hit, let me click in here. Did I hit something wrong? Let me just make sure I'm not selected. 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess it doesn't work. There was something else I had. Maybe it only works for here. 2, 3, 4. Maybe not. Huh. I don't know how that worked. I'm gonna have to figure it out. Belle, help me out here. Belle's been amazing by seeing and noticing things that I might not catch in class. For instance, she wrote a couple of your classmates and let them know some answers to some questions that I haven't had a chance to look up yet, and then wrote you guys and let you know the answers. And also, you know, she's just like a second set of eyes on here, and that's wonderful because that gives us a chance to make sure you guys are fully getting, like, you know, your questions answered, and we're able to see and have the appropriate shortcuts for you guys. Because remember, working faster equals money, right? More money. Working faster equals more money and more value that you can give to a client. So, you know, we want to make sure that you know all your shortcuts and that you understand how to look for issues and troubleshoot those issues if you have them. But anyways, getting back to this, let's go ahead and set our scene and put a material on Eve, right? So we are going to kind of unfurl this or furl this up so it's not that messy. And we're going to add... We want to go into our asset browser. We're going to add a backdrop. Studio backdrop. Let's add that in here. Plop her in. Alright, and then we want to increase on the studio backdrop if we go into object. I am not only going to increase the width, height, depth, extension, roundness. I'm going to increase all of it, right? Actually, I think this one is... me type in studio. Maybe different. Studios. We can just drop this one in if you guys want to. Let's see. Delete the other backdrop. The other one has a material on it for Redshift, and we can always delete it off of there, but it kind of just gives, it can just give a little bit different issues. So if we go into this one, nope. Select the backdrop, the actual backdrop. All right, we can change it this way too. The material is just different. So I'm going to increase this to 2000. And this is just based off of how big my model, my Eve model is. If you guys find a different reference and you notice that when you drop the backdrop in here and it's way smaller, you just, you know, update these according to what you need it to look like. And so I want this height to be quite a bit taller. So I'm going to put 1500 in here. In fact, that might be too tall. I'll just put in 1000. The depth, let's put 800. More than that, let's do 1000 on here. The extension's going to extend out the front, which I'll do 1000 as well. Nice. And the roundness is going to change how this curve looks there. So I'm going to increase that roundness quite a bit. Right? Like I want it to be, let's push it even further. I want it to be really smooth. I'll put it at 500. And then I'm going to move this kind of back a little bit there. Extend it out a little bit more. 1500. Wow, that's way bigger than I wanted. And then I am going to actually move Eve and the look target up a little bit here. All right, let me look here, making sure. Again, this is going to throw this out of whack a little bit, but if I grab this and then I move my look target right about there, her head's about straight on. Cool. Go back into here, kind of roll around here. Let's make it wider, obviously. We want this backdrop wider, much wider. So let's increase this to 3000, 4000. Perfect. I will increase the depth to 1500. So we have 3000. Let's do 2000. So everything is kind of equal. Maybe this depth back to 1500 so it's not like cut off there. But that way it goes all the way through the floor. Then if I'm moving around, like if I have this angle on it, right, I just want to make sure it's covering the entire space. I'm just going to center her for now, and I can always update this once we start animating. She's about a decent size, like position off the bottom. If you want to take all of these, right now we're not working in the polygon mode or anything. So if you want all these lines to go away, just hit NA, and it'll take that shading off, or those lines off. So all you do is see the shading there on your EveBot. And then I'm going to save this. And you know, sometimes moving and switching to world, and once you're in world mode, it works a little bit easier to move around, move like lights around and targets and stuff. So let's add, actually, if I hit the render thing, I just see it like this, but let's add some lights into this. And we're going to add target lights. So click here, add that target light in there. One's scary. Let's increase the size of here. If you can't see, if you for some reason add in this studio backdrop, sometimes these won't show up, these little edge things here. You can change that angle under the details panel here under outer angle. So let's make this even. Let's do 140. And let's zoom out here, move kind of up and move this up and back. Over a little bit, maybe a little bit in that way, a little bit higher up. All right, and let's adjust this light a little bit. So we're going to go into we moved it into place. We're going to we expanded that lit area. Now let's go and turn the shadows on to this light. So you're going to go into shadow, and we're going to put it onto Shadow Map Soft. And then we're going to just decrease the density to 50 for the shadows. And then we are going to hit Shift V so that we can bring our viewport settings up so we can actually see these shadows, right? And you're going to go into Effects, and we want to make sure that the following ones are marked on so that we can see right now. We want the HQ noises, transparency, shadows there, keep reflections on. We want that one. And then we want this one right here, the SSAO. And that stands for a screen space ambient occlusion, which is just like a quick approximation of that ambient occlusion there. But notice how all of a sudden my shadow showed up, right? And if I check this off, notice you can see what ambient occlusion is. Once, if you look here, when I check this on and off, you'll see kind of what happens, right? All of a sudden it's getting darker in those areas because those are the areas that are no longer showing closest to the camera, and they're, when the objects get close to each other, like it gets darker. Remember when I was talking about the corners of your room? When you look into the corner of your room, it's the darkest part in the room. If you were just in a fully white room, that's where the shadows are the strongest inside of there, inside the corner. And that's essentially what the ambient occlusion is. And so this looks good. Let's go ahead and control drag this over to the other side so that we have another light here. And obviously they're way too intense. So we're going to drop the intensity down of each of these lights. Under general, I'm going to drop this down to like 60. And then this one here, let's drop this to 70. So let's increase that to 80. Let's 80, and then the other one back to 70. All right, so there's like a 10% difference here that's happening with these lights. Cool. And then again, you guys can play around with the color if you want. Like, let's do these cool. Let's change this one. Let's change the brightest one to like a purple color. Let's see if we can do that here. Kind of change that. And then maybe not such a, it's kind of just very subtle, right? We don't need it super purple, but nice and subtle there. And then let's change this one to like a warm yellow kind of light. Right? Because they're opposite on the color wheel. In fact, maybe we can make it slightly more orange. More of like an orange color. Increase that, decrease it, 15, 20. Doesn't have to be very strong, remember. You know, you can do that if you want to. I'm not going to be upset if you guys want to play around with like the colored lights and stuff. Remember, it'll just affect the colors. Let's actually change this back for now. You guys can always do that later. But just for now, because I need to show you reflections. And so I want it to be white because I want you guys to see what I'm talking about when we get to the sky object here in a second. But you guys more than welcome to update the colors of your lights to add some visual interest to this, right? Now, we turn down the brightness of the lights. Let's add a material to Eve. And so inside the asset browser, we're going to just type in glossy. And there should be like a glossy white color that pops up here. And we're just going to click and drag that onto the subdivision surface. And notice how Eve is all of a sudden nice and shiny. But let's update this material a little bit because there's a couple things that you can see in here that we don't want. But let's change this material first before we get to that. And so I'm going to open the material. I'm going to delete this one because it's not even in there. And I'm going to double click on this material so we get into the material editor. And remember, you don't have to drop this material, by the way, on every single section, just on the subdivision surface, and it'll work its way down, right? Because that's apparent. And let's just kind of refine this white material a little bit. So we're going to go into the reflectance tab here. And this cover section, as soon as we start to drop it, it's going to kind of make her look a little whiter. So I'm going to bring that to about 25 because Eve is pretty white. She's like a bright white, right? So if I drop that, like if I brought this to 60, notice how it starts to get darker. I think 25 was good. 25 is nice. And then let's take this reflection strength here, or actually the roughness. Let's drop this roughness down to like 5. There we go. So it's like really shiny. She's shiny, Shanna. In fact, I'm going to bring that up just a little bit to like 8. I like that a little bit more. Maybe even 10. It doesn't have to drop that much. But that's just kind of how she's reflecting. I like that one. I like it at 10. Now, inside of Eve right now, you can see this really weird like forest scene that's kind of happening inside of the reflections, and we definitely don't want that. So in order to change this, we're going to have to set like a new sky object. This is just kind of like the default sky that happens inside of Cinema 4D, and it's unfortunately like not the best when you're doing it with different stuff. So we're gonna change it a little bit. You can update the color of Eve a little bit here, I think, so it'll add like her whole color won't change, but you can kind of make her like, oh no, it will. Never mind. You can just make her slightly like a very, very slight tint of blue. Let's see. Do I have my reference images pulled up? She's just really white. It just, her environment here is warm, and so that's why she looks kind of orangey there. Just in general, Eve is very neutral, like a neutral white. So you can do either or if you want. I just added just a slight tint into that color. I do not want a lot, right? Like I want her to look like Eve. So if you guys do that, just very, 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 very slight. And one thing I noticed is she's kind of boxy there. And so I want to just update this subdivision surface so that Eve is not like really pointed. You know, I want to increase the amount right here to 3. Notice how it smooths her out even more. And now she looks really nice. Look how smooth that was. Because like if I drop that back down to 2, you can see these edges kind of chunk out. Let's bring that back up. I think 3 is good. I'm going to save there. And let's add that sky in. So, and you'll notice that once I drop this kind of into the project, you'll see these reflections will change. So I am going to pull out here so we can see the sky object being put in. We're just going to go over here and click on the single, and then, you know, that enters the world on the outside. It's called the sky. And under, you're going to go into your asset browser, and I think we have to type in photo for the photo studio. Material. You want it to be the material, which is this is an HDR material. Again, materials are very, very, very complex things. So just make sure that when you're selecting it, you're selecting this photo studio material right here. And we're just going to click and drag that onto the sky object. And then notice that when all of a sudden, when I zoom in here onto Eve, it is no longer the reflection of the forest. It's like these studio lights that you notice are here right now. And so that looks much better. It's a much sharper looking reflections in there. That isn't like she's outside, right? If she were outside, we would have to put the specific imagery of her environment out there. But right now we're just thinking of her inside of this. We're doing a photo shoot for Eve, right? We want to make her beautiful. And so let's put in that photo studio. And this is great. So we have like our studio all set up here. Let's clean this area up. So I'm going to take the backdrop from the backdrop to the sky. I am going to select them holding down shift, and I'm going to hit Alt G to group those into a single null. Then I'm going to rename that into Studio. Perfect. You can studio background, just studio. Studio works for me. And then I'm going to incrementally save. Save incremental. Also, there is a shortcut to save incremental. It is, I haven't been using it, Control-Alt-Save. Control-Alt-Save. Easy. Incremental save there. All right. Now, awesome. Cool. Let us, Eve's almost done here. We're almost done rigging her, and we've created her. We've rigged her up. We've added the studio in here. Let's add like a face to Eve real quick. And I'm going to do this inside of, there's a few ways you can do it, whatever you're comfortable. You can do it inside of After Effects. You can do it inside of Illustrator. I happen to be comfortable in both. But either way, it's going to be a PNG that we're essentially projecting onto her face right there. And so I'm going to just, inside of Illustrator, I'm going to create a new file. 1920 by 1080 is fine. Hit create there. And let's save this as Eve face. And let's put that in the appropriate folder under assets there. Cool. We'll save that. Alrighty. And now we have to remember that Eve is going to have like it's a white background essentially, right? But we're going to, let me try and do this without a background here. I'm going to create a circle, holding down shift. About that big. And then I want to align it into the center of my composition here. And I want to make sure I don't have a stroke. And I want it to be, this is her face, right? What does her face look like? Let's pull up that picture again. Here's all, those were all of my incremental saves that I've done so far. So if I go to assets, and let's bring this reference up so I can just see it in person. Cool, her eyes are kind of, she's got these like stripes that kind of go through them, but I'm going to keep this pulled up. Kind of zoom in on that so I can see it. But the shape of her, like this black part of her face is like a skewed circle. So we're going to essentially do that inside of here. And so this, instead of white, I'm going to make this like an almost black, like very, very close, maybe slightly tinted. I'm going to go to the cooler area because I've already given her like a cool, very, very, very cool tint to her body. I'm going to hit OK there. In fact, I could even make it less intense of a black color and move it like almost like a gray blue, which really looks nice. And then I'm going to select the direct selection tool, and I'm just going to drag and select that right there. Actually, let's look at this shape again. Yeah, it's very rounded at the top and kind of squashed in at the bottom. And then these are almost like they're going to come to a point. So I'm going to grab that bottom vertex here, and I'm just going to kind of arrow it up, or just holding down shift and dragging that kind of upwards. Still slightly rounded. Not caps lock, but shift. Right down there. Then I'm going to select these two anchor points at the edge. I'm going to drag, with my direct selection tool, select that one, select this edge, and kind of hold down shift and drag that down a little bit. And then drag this back down a little bit more. And all in all, I think her head is slightly squished a little bit, so we can grab this one and kind of bring that down there. Nice. Let's do these ones again and just smooth them down a little bit more. And almost so this section here is kind of almost flat. Let me see. Back in this reference image, there's a couple more I have in here. It's very smooth on this one. Like a very smooth base there. So we kind of want it to be... Drop this down slightly more. Drop this down, holding down shift. Yeah, like a potato. Or like a rock. Holding down shift there. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to save that, and then let's add her eyes in and her. So I'm going to rename this layer to face. Create a new layer. Name it eye. And we only have to create one, right? We want it to be symmetrical, and it's kind of like this oblong shape. And so I'm going to create another circle. Let's make it blue. It's kind of like a brighter blue, though. I think that one will be okay. We're going to hold down shift and create like a perfect circle there. And then we're going to hit A for the direct selection tool again. And I am just going to select this and drag this one out. Select this, holding down shift, dragging this one out. Kind of closing this up a little bit. In and in. And then that's a pretty good shape right there. I'm going to hit V. And I want to kind of put this on an angle. It's a little big, so let me, holding down shift, just kind of scale it down a little bit. Put that right there. It's a little bit on too much of an angle. Right there. And let's duplicate this and mirror it, right? So let's Control C, Shift Control V, so it duplicates it on top. And then we're just going to hit this flip horizontally. And then we are going to hold down Shift and just kind of drag it over to here. And then we want to select these both and distribute them evenly. Right, so distributing your objects over here on your Align panel this way and then this way. We want to distribute them along the horizontal path and then the vertical path. Perfect. And then we can group those together and then select this and select these and just make sure they're centered. We can even group these together and center them inside of the entire composition right there. Then I moved it. There we go. Perfect. And so now we have this. I'm going to change the colors. Shift Control G to ungroup. Let's update the colors of these real quick. They're not quite as bright as I wanted. Let's look at that reference again. Yeah, they've kind of got like, well, obviously they've kind of got like this gradient blue in the middle. We can try that. Let's see if it works. So we're going to select the eyes and hit gradient there. And then we want them to be radial gradients. And if this isn't pulled up, by the way, for you guys, it might be over here on the side toolbar, or you just go to Window and then look for gradient right there. And that way you can just update this as well. And so we're going to, let's change these colors. This one's going to be a dark blue. Kind of make it a little bit darker. Like that. That's okay. Right there. And then let's take this one and we are going to color pick. Nope. Take this one, double click it. And we're going to change this color too. bright. Like a brighter green. Or blue, sorry. Cyan is too bright. So let's double click this and making sure they're about the same. In fact, what you can do is delete this, and then once you get the let's go back real quick. Hit V, ungroup these, delete this one. Let's make sure we have it all set up before we start to, let's bring up this cancel, this gradient. Right there. This needs to be brighter, obviously. Edit gradient. There we go. Come on. And I think this needs to be a little bit brighter. I think that looks better. You can make a pink, whatever colors you guys want to make them. Green, anything like that. And so I'm going to select this. I'm going to hit save again. I'm going to select this, Control C, Shift Control V, paste in place. And then I'm going to mirror it again under the Properties panel, mirroring it, holding down Shift, dragging it over, select both of them, going to the Align panel, and distributing the objects evenly, grouping them together, holding, selecting the face and holding the eyes with Shift, and let's center them to each other, and then grouping those together and centering that into our composition. And then I'm going to save this, and we are going to File, Export as a PNG. So we want to make sure it says PNG. We're going to save it into our assets again. Use the artboard. Export that. You want the transparency, right? So it has to be a PNG. And then I am going to later Gator, don't care about that right now. I'm going to close this out. And before you have to have like a white background happening, but I don't think that, I'm hoping it's not going to make a big difference when we add it to her face. Come on now, close out. Oh, my mouse is being funny. There we go. Close that out. All right. So now we want to add her face onto here, this PNG. But in order to do so, we have to create a new material. And so, we are going to, up here, just hit the plus button. And let's rename this to face. Select that. Material again. And under the color channel, we're going to open this up. And under this color channel here, under the texture is where we want to find that image that we just created. Assets. This one right here. Open. And it's not a project search path. Yes. Okay, perfect. So now we have this essentially like projected onto our Eve, like onto this material, right? And the reflectance, so we don't really need the reflectance tab in there, so we want to unselect that because you notice how it's like reflecting the light. We don't need that. We want it to look like a digital like face, right? So we don't want any reflections happening there. And let's check on the alpha though to make sure that it still contains that alpha channel. And under this alpha channel, we also have to add the image under the texture here as well. So I'm going to just search for that again. Assets, grab that Eve face. Okay. Yes. And then it should be fully load. We need to load this image of the texture. Notice that notice that the edges now are cut out, right? There's no white sphere around it. It is just the face at this moment. And so that's exactly what we want. And so I'm going to close this out now. And we want to add this material to just the head of Eve. We don't need it on anything else but her head. And so we're going to drag and drop this onto the head there. And I mean, we're getting there, right? Not quite what we're looking for. First of all, let's add this glossy texture back to her head, but then reorder the layers because the white has to be on the bottom and then the face is on the top, right? So make sure your layers are ordered appropriately. And let's just update this material tag slightly. So we want to select this tag. And under the material tag, we don't want it to tile. Right now it's kind of tiling all around the head, so we're going to uncheck that. And then we want it to only really show in the front. So we want to select the front side here. The side has to be the front. That's the only place we want it. Unmark the tile. And then under projection display is where we need to change... I'm sorry, under projection, not projection display, is where we need to change where this is at. And so if I hit frontal and select the material and hit E, I think I can, nope, let's see here. Here, oh yeah. Duh. So we want to hit, make sure the tag, the material tag is selected on your layer. Right there. And then you want to hit material, the texture mode up here at the top that I was talking about at the beginning of the class. And then we're going to update the position of that. It should have worked. Let me see here. It's on material mode. The tag is highlighted. Only this tag. Got the material mode. Let's see if we hit, instead of frontal, flat. Okay. Yeah, there we go. If you hit flat, then it starts to move that. If you put the projection to flat, it'll project it appropriately. And only on the... it does put it on the back, but I think that... let me see if it just says frontal... If it's just frontal, it's like on the bottom section of it, which kind of gets to a harder place and it doesn't move appropriately. Let's go back to flat. Cylindrical. Oh, maybe that works. And now can I move it? Nope. Not cylindrical. It's moving it around these shapes. You have to think. So we'll go back to flat since that one seems to work the best. And let's move that over so it's like centered in her face. And then we're going to scale it out this way so it's fits her head a little bit more. There we go. That looks really good. All right, so I'm going to save this. And then let's just double check the interactive render region up here. We want to check the interactive render region so that we can see that it's showing up, which it is not, right? So why isn't it showing up? Sometimes when you do this and add the material on like this, it adds it on backwards. So in order to do that, to fix that texture, we're going to turn the interactive render region off. And we're going to select that texture again and make sure we're in the material mode. And we're going to hit R and we're just going to rotate it a full 180 degrees. Holding down Shift. There we go. And now if I turn the interactive render region on, it will show up. Sweet. And so there, you guys, we have our EveBot in just in time before class is over. So this is kind of where I want you guys to get this week, if you can, to this specific spot. And then on Thursday, we are going to go over your participation questions. And then we're also going to go over the animating of Eve. And so, yeah, I suggest right now, like I said, these projects are going to just get more complex and more longer and heavier and just more aspects to them. So I would really keep up at this point with your projects. You guys have been doing really good. I have a lot of the robots to go over. If for some reason you really want me to go over them in class, like please let me know and we'll go over your projects in class. But if not, I'll just be giving feedback via Canvas in the notes via Canvas. And so I have still to catch up with the robot ones that were due yesterday, which is fine. But I still have to catch up on your revisions, your revision rounds as well. So yeah, other than that, I hope you guys have a good night. And I will talk to you guys on Thursday.